Right now, you probably consider yourself a good person. You help others, follow your values, wouldn't deliberately harm innocents. You're not like those people in history books, the ones who participated in atrocities or turned blind eyes to suffering. But decades of psychological research reveal an uncomfortable truth. Ordinary people, people much like us, regularly become complicit in systems that cause harm. This isn't an attack on anyone's character. It's a warning about universal human vulnerabilities we all share. The question isn't whether you're a good person. It's whether you understand the psychological forces that can transform good intentions into harmful complicity, and what you can do to resist them. We tell ourselves a comforting story. Evil is done by evil people, and since we're good, we're immune. This isn't just naive. It's the very thinking that enables harm to flourish. Hannah Arendt, covering the Eichmann trials after World War II, observed something that should unsettle us all. The architects of genocide weren't monsters from nightmares. They were ordinary bureaucrats, parents, music lovers. She called this the banality of evil, noting that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. Psychology confirms this pattern across contexts. We consistently rate ourselves as more ethical than others, what researchers call the better-than-average effect. We're the heroes of our own narratives, finding ways to justify our actions while condemning identical behavior in others. But some people do resist. What made Irina Sendler smuggle Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto while her neighbors looked away? What enabled Karen Silkwood to expose nuclear safety violations despite corporate retaliation? What distinguished those who said no from those who complied? Research on moral courage reveals key factors. Resistors maintain strong personal values independent of social approval. They practice taking responsibility in small situations before facing large tests. And crucially, they see themselves as capable of making a difference rather than as powerless cogs. The danger isn't evil people. It's good people who stop questioning their own actions because they assume their goodness is automatic, rather than something requiring constant vigilance. In 1961, Stanley Milgram conducted what would become one of the most disturbing experiments in human history. Ordinary participants delivered what they believed were fatal electric shocks to innocent people, simply because a man in a lab coat told them it was necessary. 65% complied completely, but not everyone did. The resistors questioned legitimacy rather than themselves. They maintained personal responsibility despite systemic pressure. They had practiced saying no in smaller situations before facing larger tests. This reveals something crucial. Evil doesn't need monsters. It needs systems. Systems sophisticated enough to make participation feel reasonable. The lab coat becomes a technology of transformation, turning moral agents into obedient functionaries. Modern parallels surround us, but they've evolved to feel invisible. Consider the tech employee who discovers their algorithm prioritizing divisive content for engagement, but stays silent because that's not my department. The financial advisor who sells products they know will harm clients because I'm just following company policy. The factory supervisor who ignores safety violations because I don't make the rules. Each situation contains the same psychological machinery. Institutional roles that provide scripts for behavior, authority figures who offer certainty, and language that creates distance from consequences. But each also contains individuals who could choose different responses. Your current situations, your job, your social circles, your digital environments, are shaping your behavior right now. The question is whether you're conscious of these influences and actively choosing your responses, or simply drifting along with institutional currents. Here's an uncomfortable truth about human nature. Responsibility is terrifying. Making moral decisions, standing alone with your principles, accepting consequences, it's exhausting and frightening. So we do something that feels much safer. We let systems make our moral decisions for us. I was just doing my job. That's not my department. I don't make the rules. This isn't conscious evil. It's what Hannah Arendt called thoughtlessness, the abdication of thinking that turns us into what she termed cogs in a machine. Psychology calls this diffusion of responsibility, and modern institutions have perfected it. Corporate hierarchies obscure individual accountability. Digital platforms distance us from the human impact of our choices. Bureaucratic procedures make harmful outcomes feel like inevitable system outputs, rather than the result of human decisions. Consider how pharmaceutical companies price medications. No single person decides to let diabetics die. Executives optimize shareholder value. Researchers focus on efficacy data. Marketing teams highlight benefits. Regulators follow established protocols. The system produces the outcome while each individual follows their role's moral script. But within that same system, some employees become whistleblowers. Some researchers publish unfavorable findings despite pressure. Some regulators prioritize public health over industry relationships. The difference isn't the system, it's the choice to maintain personal moral responsibility within it. When was the last time you truly accepted full moral responsibility for a difficult decision? When did you last stand alone with your principles, regardless of what others expected? Picture this scenario. You're in a crowded building when the fire alarm goes off. You smell smoke but can't see flames. Other people seem uncertain. Some are moving toward exits, others are staying put, looking around for cues about what to do. In that moment of ambiguity, who do you follow? Whoever seems most confident, most authoritative, most certain about what's happening. This is how authority captures us, not through force, but through our desperate need for certainty in an uncertain world. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us about this with his concept of the herd instinct, our tendency to surrender individual judgment to collective thinking. When we're uncertain, confused, or overwhelmed, we look for someone, anyone who seems to have answers. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments revealed this starkly. Participants were asked to identify which of 3 lines matched a reference line, a task so simple that people made mistakes less than 1% of the time when alone. But when surrounded by actors giving obviously wrong answers, 75% of participants conformed to the group at least once, choosing social acceptance over their own senses. This pattern appears everywhere. During economic crises, people embrace authoritarian leaders who promised simple solutions. In corporate crises, employees follow whoever seems most confident about the path forward. In social media environments, users amplify information that confirms their group's worldview, rather than questioning uncertain claims. The 2008 financial crisis illustrates this perfectly. As housing markets became increasingly unstable, mortgage brokers, investment bankers, and rating agencies all faced uncertainty about the true risk of complex financial instruments. Rather than acknowledging this uncertainty, most chose to follow industry consensus and regulatory guidance, participating in a system they privately suspected was unsustainable. The frightening part isn't that some people seek power during uncertainty. It's that most of us, when faced with ambiguity, will gratefully surrender our judgment to anyone who appears certain, even when that certainty is false. How often do you question the confident voices around you? How comfortable are you with uncertainty, with not knowing, with having to think for yourself? Language isn't just communication, it's camouflage. Nowhere is this more dangerous than when harmful actions wrap themselves in bureaucratic terminology, technical jargon, and sanitized euphemisms. Nazi officials didn't discuss murder. They planned evacuation and resettlement. They weren't killing people. They were solving logistical problems. This wasn't accidental. Language was weaponized to create psychological distance between action and consequence. We see this linguistic camouflage everywhere today. Tech companies don't manipulate users. They optimize engagement. Governments don't spy on citizens. They conduct surveillance for national security. Defense contractors don't profit from warfare. They provide strategic solutions. The policymaker advocating for austerity measures is cutting essential services that vulnerable populations depend on for survival. The language creates moral distance, allowing participation in harmful systems while maintaining self-image as good people. When Purdue Pharma executives called OxyContin non-addictive pain relief, they weren't lying in their own minds. They were using industry terminology that obscured the human reality of addiction and death. But strip away the euphemisms and ask yourself, what are you actually doing? What are the real consequences of your actions? Who benefits and who suffers? Evil rarely begins with dramatic moral failures. It starts with small compromises that seem insignificant in isolation but accumulate over time, each one making the next easier to justify. Psychologists call this the foot in the door effect. People who agree to small requests become more likely to agree to larger ones later. The mechanism is cognitive dissonance, our need for consistency between our actions and self-image. Once we've acted against our values, we face a choice. Change our behavior or change our values. Changing our values feels easier. Consider how corporate corruption typically unfolds. It rarely starts with someone deciding to embezzle millions. It begins with a manager slightly inflating expense reports during a tight month, telling themselves it's temporary. Next month, the practice feels normal. Soon, they're helping others do the same. Eventually, they're running schemes they would have found unthinkable years earlier. The Theranos scandal illustrates this progression. Elizabeth Holmes likely didn't start with plans to defraud investors and endanger patients. She probably began by overstating early progress, then found herself trapped in escalating deceptions as each small lie required larger ones to maintain credibility. But others within the company faced the same pressures and chose differently. Scientists who refused to falsify data, even early in the company's history, maintained boundaries that ultimately protected them from deeper complicity in the fraud. But recognizing this pattern creates opportunities for intervention. Some people develop what researchers call moral boundaries, clear lines they will not cross regardless of pressure. I will never lie to protect my employer from legitimate criticism. I will never ignore safety violations when I witness them. I will never prioritize profit over patient welfare in my medical practice. The key is setting these boundaries before you need them, when you're thinking clearly rather than under pressure. Write them down. Share them with trusted friends who can remind you when you're facing temptation. What small compromises are you making right now? What precedents are you setting? What kind of person are you becoming through these choices? Perhaps the most dangerous form of complicity is the kind that feels virtuous, when we participate in harmful systems while believing we're fighting for justice, defending the innocent, or serving a greater good. This dangerous dynamic becomes embedded within systems when righteous causes become the justification for harmful institutional practices, obscuring individual complicity. When we're absolutely certain we're right, when our cause feels sacred, our enemies feel evil, our methods feel justified, we become capable of extraordinary cruelty. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us, whoever fights monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. But he also said something even more chilling. Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. Henri Teifel's social identity theory explains the psychology behind this. We define ourselves partly by the groups we belong to, and we enhance our self-esteem by viewing our group as superior to others. This creates in-group favoritism and out-group hostility that can escalate into dehumanization. History overflows with atrocities committed by people convinced they were saving the world. But this pattern isn't confined to historical extremes. It operates within modern systems through what psychologists call moral licensing, the tendency to act less ethically after establishing our moral credentials. The environmental activist who flies frequently for conferences, the social justice advocate who silences dissenting voices, the corporate diversity officer who overlooks discrimination within their own department, all demonstrate how righteous causes can become systems that enable the very harms they claim to oppose. Consider how some wellness companies operate. Executives genuinely believe they're helping people achieve health and happiness, yet they build business models dependent on customers feeling inadequate and purchasing endless solutions. The righteous goal of helping people becomes a system that profits from perpetual dissatisfaction. This dynamic explains why some of the most harmful systems throughout history have been staffed by true believers rather than cynical opportunists. The Inquisition attracted people who genuinely wanted to save souls. Stalin's purges were carried out by committed communists who believed they were building a perfect society. Modern authoritarian movements draw supporters who sincerely think they're protecting their communities. The more certain you are that you're fighting evil, the more capable you become of committing it. The more righteous your anger, the more dangerous your actions. The more absolute your convictions, the more likely you are to abandon basic human decency. When you feel that surge of righteous certainty, when you're absolutely sure about who the good guys and bad guys are, when extreme measures feel justified, that's exactly when you need to be most careful. Here's the insight that ties everything together. We don't just live within systems that cause harm, we actively perpetuate them through countless daily choices, often while believing we're working against them. This isn't about perfect moral purity. That's impossible in complex modern societies. It's about honest acknowledgement of our positions within harmful systems and thoughtful consideration of how to minimize damage while working for change. Consider your relationship with technology. You might criticize social media's impact on democracy and mental health, yet your engagement patterns provide the data that makes surveillance capitalism profitable. Your smartphone depends on rare earth minerals extracted through environmental destruction and labor exploitation. Your streaming entertainment supports platforms that amplify conspiracy theories and extremist content through algorithmic recommendations. Or consider economic complicity. Your retirement investments likely include companies whose practices contradict your stated values. Your tax dollars fund policies you might personally oppose. Your consumer choices support supply chains involving exploited labor, even when you specifically seek ethical alternatives. Psychology calls this the bystander effect. The more people present during an emergency, the less likely anyone is to help because everyone assumes someone else will take responsibility. Albert Bandura's research on moral disengagement shows how we systematically disconnect our moral standards from our actions through euphemisms, displacing responsibility onto authorities, minimizing harm, and dehumanizing those affected. The goal isn't paralysis or perfect purity, it's conscious engagement. Some people practice harm reduction, making choices that minimize rather than eliminate their participation in harmful systems. Others focus on what researcher Albert Bandura calls moral agency, identifying specific areas where they can take meaningful action despite systemic constraints. The key is moving beyond either paralyzing guilt or comfortable rationalization toward conscious, strategic engagement with moral complexity. You can't be perfect, but you can be conscious. You can't eliminate all harm, but you can minimize the harm you cause while working to change harmful systems. What systems are you part of that you've never truly questioned? How many roles do you play where you've silently accepted, that's just how things work here? Research on moral courage suggests several practical approaches for developing resistance to harmful complicity, organized into 4 key areas. Cognitive strategies help us think clearly about moral choices. When presented with requests or policies, ask yourself, what would I call this if it were happening to someone I loved? This simple reframing cuts through institutional euphemisms to reveal human impact. Regularly trace the full chain from your actions to their ultimate effects. The data analyst isn't just processing numbers, they're enabling decisions that affect real people's lives. Periodically compare your stated values with your actual behavior patterns to identify gaps between ideals and reality. Ask yourself, what would I need to believe to justify this? And would I want this decision published on the front page? Behavioral practices strengthen moral resistance through repetition. Practice saying no in low-stakes situations to build psychological muscle for larger tests. The cashier who politely refuses to break company policy in minor matters develops skills for refusing major ethical compromises. Regularly envision yourself in ethically challenging scenarios and mentally rehearse your responses. Write down specific lines you will not cross and share them with trusted people who can remind you during pressure situations. Social strategies recognize that resistance is easier with support. Seek others who share your values within institutions and systems. Even one ally provides crucial support when facing pressure to comply. Demonstrate through your own example that resistance is possible and sustainable. When others take moral stands, offer practical and emotional backing to create networks of reinforcement. Institutional approaches prepare you for systemic resistance. Keep records of wrongdoing you witness, maintaining evidence that might be needed later. Research whistleblower protections, ethics hotlines, and advocacy organizations before you need them. Maintain financial and professional options that give you freedom to leave situations that seriously compromise your values. The goal isn't perfection, it's developing what psychologists call moral resilience, the capacity to maintain ethical standards under pressure while continuing to engage constructively with imperfect systems. Throughout history, in every context where harm flourished, some individuals found ways to resist. During the Holocaust, people like Oskar Schindler, Raoul Wallenberg, and thousands of others whose names we'll never know, chose to help rather than comply. During slavery, conductors on the Underground Railroad risked everything to guide people to freedom. During segregation, civil rights workers faced violence and imprisonment to challenge unjust laws. They weren't superheroes or uniquely powerful people, but they made a choice to act when it mattered. And that choice didn't start in some grand moment, it started in small ones. Research shows that moral courage is built over time. The people who resisted evil often had a habit of standing up in smaller situations first. They practiced saying no. They surrounded themselves with others who shared their values. They saw themselves not as victims of systems, but as agents within them. You're already in that same position, right now, every single day. When your boss pressures you to cut corners, when your friends normalize behavior that feels wrong, when you see injustice and feel the urge to stay silent, those are your moments. Those are your tests. Start small. Practice questioning what others accept. Get comfortable with discomfort. Build relationships with people who value truth over popularity. Create buffers, financial, emotional, social, that let you walk away from what you know is wrong. The uncomfortable woman in the quarterly meeting who asks, "Have we considered the impact on local communities?" The accountant who quietly documents irregularities even when told to ignore them. The teacher who refuses to lower grades under administrative pressure. The nurse who reports understaffing despite knowing it could cost their job. These quiet acts of conscience might seem small, but they're the daily practice of moral agency that prepares people for larger moments when they arrive. You're not alone in wanting to live with integrity. Millions of people quietly wrestle with the same questions. finding those people and being one of them is itself a form of resistance. The big moments history remembers are just the result of 1,000 small ones you never see. What you do when no one's watching, that's what prepares you for when everyone is. The uncomfortable truths we've explored aren't meant to paralyze you with guilt or cynicism. They're meant to wake you up to both your vulnerability and your power. Yes, you're susceptible to the psychological forces that make complicity likely. Yes, you're embedded in systems that cause harm. Yes, you'll face pressure to prioritize comfort over conscience. But you're also capable of extraordinary good. You have the power to recognize these pressures, to consciously choose your responses, to resist when resistance is called for. You can develop moral courage, build support networks, and become the kind of person who helps bend systems toward justice. The choice isn't between perfection and failure. It's between consciousness and unconsciousness, between agency and passivity, between being a moral agent who thinks for yourself and being a passive participant who lets others make your ethical decisions. Evil thrives on our moral laziness, our psychological defenses, our willingness to let institutions define our values. But those defenses can be examined and modified. That responsibility can be reclaimed. The gap between our ideals and actions can be narrowed. The world needs people who understand these dynamics and choose to resist them. People who maintain moral agency despite institutional pressure. People who practice courage in small moments so they're ready for larger tests. Your answer to these challenges matters, and it starts with what you choose to do next.